Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, October 21st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Nebraska game is in 5 days. The game against Michigan in 40 days. Last night's show put that up a little later than normal because I needed to let a couple of those games finish up. The Iowa State Cyclones ended up hanging on, coming from behind to beat UCF. Being unbeaten, the Georgia Bulldogs ended up hanging on to knock off formerly number one Texas. Now number one in the nation is the Oregon Ducks. Number two, the Georgia Bulldogs. But man, oh man, this has already been a crazy season in college football. Only 20 teams in the Power Four conferences have 0 or 1 loss. So today we're going to be trying to take a bigger picture look. We're still a couple weeks out from that first college football playoff ranking show. But man, oh man, there is going to be a lot of drama between now and the end of the college football regular season. And 1 loss, and even 2 losses now, not necessarily going to be a season killer. Joined by Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony, you had a fantastic tweet on Saturday night. It brings me no pleasure to give you a compliment here. But man, I'm so old, I can remember when people were saying the 12-team college football playoff would absolutely kill the regular season and the games wouldn't mean anything. This has been one of the most entertaining college football regular seasons I can remember. Everyone's taking losses. Still sort of feels like they all mean quite a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, the anger and the angst on Twitter, the crowds going crazy, the look of disappointment on some of those Texas fans Saturday night. Yes, these are people still living and dying with their favorite sport, and they'll continue to do so. And the thing that we've always said is that for the people who say that the expanded playoffs will negate the regular season, you're seeing that it is making the regular season a longer affair. More teams are in it for longer, and so more games matter. The more games count, and more teams are now still in the picture that wouldn't have been before. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, there are a lot more teams that are still involved. And, you look at the end of the Major League Baseball regular season where they expanded it, and now there's 6 teams in each league that make the playoffs, and you can have the conversation about whether that waters down the playoffs. Probably does. But in baseball, it's a short series, and because of the nature of baseball, the better team only wins about 55% of the time. In college football, that's probably not going to be the case. I don't think you're going to have a ton of just absolutely shocking upsets in the first 2 weeks of the college football playoff. We'll see if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I will absolutely let you know I'm wrong, but I don't think that's going to be how it happens. So this just keeps teams potentially involved, excited a lot longer and further into the season, makes those games a little more high stakes. So going to take a run through the Power Four conferences right now and look at the teams that have 0 and 1 loss, with the understanding, obviously, a lot of these teams have not played each other yet. So these are ultimately going to be teams that get knocked out just by virtue of losing to each other, let alone if they have an upset loss to someone else. So Tony, I think one of the most surprising stats we've seen over the course of the season already is there is only one Power Four conference that has 0 unbeaten teams. It is the mighty SEC. The Texas Longhorns were the last ones to go down. Now the 1-loss teams, Texas A&M, they lost week 1 to Notre Dame. LSU, they lost week 1 to USC. Georgia, they lost to Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, Texas. I mean, there are 6 teams there, all theoretically still in the picture, although you look at Missouri just barely scraping by against certain teams, and it's like, yeah, okay, well, I don't know how long you'll be there. We'll see how long Texas A&M is there. But, that's a conference where everyone had sort of penciled them in for 4, maybe 5 teams. Maybe not.
It's interesting when you look at the standings, you're like, oh yeah, Texas A&M. I had moved past them after like week 2 of the season, or maybe like week 4 of last season. And to see them back up there at the top, it's interesting. You would expect, and to see Alabama kind of out of the picture right now, there's just a lot of talent there, and a lot of ranked teams. But we've also seen no great team. A lot of flaws in the SEC. I mean, we watched Carson Beck throw 2 interceptions to Texas and not look good throughout much of that game. We saw Texas do have quarterback issues themselves, and so it's interesting. But at least now, Tom, we know that everybody in the SEC has played somebody. So You can't say they ain't played nobody because they've all played somebody and lost.
They all have played somebody, and it's incredible to have 6 teams on that list, and none of them are named the Alabama Crimson Tide. That's really amazing. And 2 losses, I think you can get in. I think you can still get in with 2 losses. 3 losses, if you're 9-3, unless you've got a remarkably difficult schedule and you've won, all of your, you've lost nothing but great games against, close games against great teams. I think that's going to be a hard ask. So can Alabama win out? Maybe, but that's going to be a tough ask for them. Moving on to the Big Ten, 5 teams, Tony, unbeaten or with 1 loss. 3 of them we absolutely expected to be here. That would be the unbeaten Oregon Ducks, the unbeaten Penn State Nittany Lions, and the 1-loss Ohio State Buckeyes. Figured those 3 were going to be strongly in the college football playoff picture all season long. We also have to talk about the unbeaten Indiana Hoosiers hosting College Game Day on Saturday. The 1-loss Illinois Fighting the Illini just handed Michigan their 3rd loss of the season. This is one where there's not as much overlap with these teams. They don't all play each other. So this is not necessarily something that's going to resolve itself. I don't think I'm really buying Illinois winning out and remaining in this group. But Indiana, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, Illinois, theoretically, it is possible if Illinois beats Oregon and Ohio State beats Indiana and Penn State, it is possible there could be a 5-way tie at the end of the regular season with those 5 teams all having exactly 1 Big Ten loss. I think, I've read through the Big Ten tiebreakers, Tony. I think Ohio State would be in decent shape there because they would have wins over 2 of those other teams, but oh boy, we've talked about some of the benefits of conference expansion and more of these great games. A 5-way tie for 2 spots in the Big Ten championship game, that's going to be quite a mess if that happens.
Yeah, it would be. I still think if Illinois, they play Oregon at Oregon 3:30 on Saturday. If they were to win that game, shouldn't they be allowed, and they win out, shouldn't they be allowed to go to the Big Ten championship game? And of course, Penn State would say, but we beat Illinois, and now here come all of the tiebreakers. So no easy answer time. I think the best answer is about 4 years down the road, Big Ten semifinal championship, Big Ten semifinal game and a championship game. That way, you turn the last week into a random, everybody gets to play somebody type of thing like they did in the COVID year. I wouldn't be shocked if that's one thing that eventually happens, but this is, we talk about this, all of these teams can do this, and it never ends up happening. Now, this is a brand new scenario, but this is also the point in the season where we're like, in the past, we'd be like, well, there's 7 teams right now that could end up undefeated, and then by the end of the season, they're down to 2. But there are going to be some situations where there are going to be an awful lot of 1 and 2 loss teams and a lot of 2 loss teams, I think, this season, that the committee is really going to have a difficult time parsing through which 2 losses are better and which wins, if you have any. Because I also think you got to start valuing wins more as well. And you can't just give people credit for good losses. They need to have some good wins in there too.
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting to hear how the committee starts talking about that. The first Tuesday night of November, nothing else going on nationally that night, Tony. Just the first release of the college football playoff rankings. It's going to be very interesting to hear how the committee is talking about the ranking good wins versus good losses versus strength of schedule versus shiny records. We know how they've talked about it in the past. It'll be interesting to see how they talk about it moving forward. I'm not expecting a 5-way Big Ten tie, but a 3-way Big Ten tie, that's a real possibility, feels like. So that's the Big Ten. On to the ACC. This is another one where unbeaten Miami. Yeah, sure, we could have seen that at this point in the season. Unbeaten Pitt. Less predictable. And then Clemson, SMU, Duke, and Syracuse, all 1-loss teams right now. This is one where the ACC is almost certainly not getting more than 2 teams. But you could potentially see, if Miami runs unbeaten and then they play Clemson, for example, in the ACC championship game, and they lose, and you're a 12-1 Miami, and Clemson's your ACC champion, it feels like the ACC could steal a second bid there. There were a lot of projections where they only had one team in the college football playoff field. If they steal a second one, that makes the conversation a little more interesting around the fourth Big Ten team or fourth SEC team or whoever's on the bubble.
Yeah, you start to squeeze. It's the bracket buster type of things where in basketball, you all of the teams on the bubble want the conference favorites to win their automatic bid leagues, because when they don't, now you've just removed somebody. And say Miami wins out and Clemson has 2 losses, but their losses are to an undefeated Miami and Georgia. Is that really enough to knock them out? But then it just goes back to what I said. What are Clemson's good wins? And when you're playing, I guess in the ACC as it stands right now, if they can get some wins over these one loss teams, or however many they play, that would be good. But how many of these teams do you expect to stick at 2 losses for the ACC as well? And I think that becomes an issue where they're not all that good. And when you see SMU with 1 loss and Pitt with no losses, you're talking about the 22nd and the 19th ranked team in the nation, respectively. So not a lot of expectations there. And so you would expect a couple of losses to come into play. But Clemson, I think that's Clemson watching Miami and watching the way that Cam Ward is sometimes Superman, sometimes, I don't know, Superman doesn't have a sidekick, so I'll say sometimes Robin. Not even a good Robin, like one of the kids, like Jan and Zayna or whatever from the Super Friends, one of these bumbling fools that he can be at times. Can Clemson capitalize on those instances and avoid doing those things themselves? But yeah, anybody watching this that isn't an ACC fan, you kind of, as much as Ohio State fans hate Miami, you might just want Miami to win out right now.
Yeah, it feels like you might get into that situation. Now, Clemson does play Pitt. The rest of their schedule, that would really be their only remotely signature win this season. You got to remember, they didn't just lose close to Georgia. They got killed by Georgia week 1, 34-3. So they do not play Syracuse. They do not play SMU. They do not play Duke. And they do not play Miami. So really, Pitt is the only team in that cluster of teams that Clemson could potentially have a little bit of a scalp on the wall. And, there's no guarantee. Just because Pitt's unbeaten right now does not mean Pitt is going to finish this regular season with 0 or 1 losses, because they have to go play Syracuse this Thursday night. They play at SMU next week. Then they play Clemson. They play at Louisville. It feels like Pitt might finish with 3 losses and make that sort of devalue that potential Clemson win there. Last Power 4 conference we got to talk about, the Big 12. Talked about this on last night's show. BYU was picked to finish 13th in the nation, or 13th in the Big 12 during the preseason media polls. They were, as of last night, 13th in the nation, still unbeaten. Iowa State, still unbeaten. Kansas State, just 1 loss, but only those 3 teams. BYU and Iowa State both kind of got a scare this weekend. BYU against Oklahoma State, Iowa State against UCF. Kansas State already has 1 loss. That feels like a league where someone's going to got at some point. That it feels like the Big 12 is going to get 1 team in, only 1 team in. Very unlikely you're going to get 2, just because they're not getting a ton of respect right now. They're both unbeaten, but not getting a ton of respect in the AP polls. Not a lot of great signature wins. Iowa losing to Michigan State over the weekend probably did not help Iowa State's case in terms of a quality out-of-conference win. The Big 12 feels like one that is, barring something really weird, very likely to be a 1-bid conference, which will help those bubble teams in the other leagues.
Yeah, I'm just looking like how do they get 2 bids? Is it just BYU and Iowa State staying undefeated and both teams getting to go? Because they don't play in the regular season. They would play in the Big 12 championship game. Would the committee take both of those teams? Kansas State finishes the season. They are 6-1 right now. They finished the season at Iowa State. So just watch out for the Big 12 refs on that one. If Iowa State is, undefeated at that point, I'm just saying, keep an eye on that one. But yeah, really, to me, has any Big 12 1-loss team done enough if it's not one of the two teams in the championship game? And even then, have they done enough? Can the committee take a 2-loss SEC or Big Ten team over a 1-loss Big 12 team? Yes. How will they justify it? However they want. Would it look great? Depends on the wins that all of those teams have had.
And Kansas State, in case you're wondering who their loss was, it was 38-9 at BYU earlier in the year. So that's a very easy one for the committee to say they were non-competitive in that game and justify, hey, booting them to the curb. We're not even getting into the group of 5 teams. Group of 5 is going to get one team in. Army, Navy, undefeated. That could be a fascinating situation. UNLV, Boise State playing this week. That could be a potential college football playoff play-out game, elimination game for whoever loses that one. It is, man, this is going to be a banger of a last month and a half of the college football regular season as we head into the first year of the 12-team college football playoff. Cannot wait. Going to be a lot of excitement. 1 loss no longer kills your season. 2 losses might no longer kill your season. And somehow the games remain exciting. It's the darndest thing. Well, we will be there for all of those games, Tony, Kevin, and I, as we cover the Buckeyes coming down the home stretch of the season. We'll be covering the team, Mark covering recruiting, our whole team of X's and O's gurus there, making you a smarter football fan, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And of course, we want you to join us as well at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Lots of great podcasts, lots of great interviews, lots of great content behind the scenes, and much, much more, all at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.